What's up, everybody? My name is Jacob Hardison, and today we're going to give you 5 more tips on how to get faster at the track. Alrighty, so here we are with another video on the lovely Adrenaline RC YouTube channel, and today, of course, we're going to go ahead and give you guys 5 more tips on how to get faster at the track. It seems like that the original 5 tips video was super popular, super well received, so I figured, why not give another 5? So without further ado, we'll cut the chit chat and we'll get straight into those 5 tips. Tip number 1 today is going to be something that is relatively straightforward on the face value, but definitely something that I see people forget about over time, and that is just be aware and be patient of your surroundings on the track. Obviously, in a perfect world, if you're on a TQ run, the beautiful thing to have happen is everybody gets out of your way, you don't have to worry about getting hit, you just continue on your lovely run. But of course, as we know, every single driver is a variable on track. You never really know what somebody else is going to do, so it's important to make sure that you mentally are able to recognize, hey, I'm catching up to somebody, or if that person around you, maybe you just know that that person generally drives a bit more aggressive. So it's important to make sure that you know, hey, maybe I should take a little bit of extra time here, take a little bit of extra patience, and make sure that I can work through this without having any issues. And I'm definitely one that is always for the fact it's a lot nicer to sacrifice half a second or a second while you're working with other people rather than push the issue, make a move happen that maybe just didn't need to happen regardless of what the circumstance is. And then of course, now you've wrecked, somebody's hit you, and you've lost 5-10 seconds waiting on a marshal rather than just taking that little bit of time and just giving it a moment before you actually make that move by. So tip number 1 is just gonna be aware, have patience, don't push the issue if you don't need to, and make sure that you are familiar with the guys you are on the track with. Tip number 2 here is going to be to make sure that you clean your tires in between each run. And then of course, if you're on an indoor style track where you're maybe on a bar tire or you're on a slick tire, it's always good to also sauce in between each run. Now the saucing is a little bit of an extra, but I think definitely the cleaning the tires end of things is super important because it doesn't allow the tire to really grip into the track. It makes the tire feel more stiff. And then of course, if you're on a track that is a little bit more tacky, maybe you just have clumps of mud built up in the tire that weren't able to come out. So you always want to make sure that you wash your tires with warm water and Simple Green. It'll make sure the tire stays in good condition, the pores stay all nice, happy, and healthy, and that of course, your tire provides the best grip and the most consistent grip as you go out for your next run. The saucing is a little bit more of an extra. Definitely not something that I think is going to be ultra important as you're starting out. A, because you go through tires a lot, and B, you're just learning the process. But definitely as you get faster and faster, and if you're on an indoor clay style track, it is going to assist your grip and definitely could potentially make up a couple of tenths there. So a bit of a double tip there. The number 1 thing definitely being to make sure you clean your tires in between each run, and depending on the circumstance, make sure you throw some sauce on them. Tip number 3 is going to be to practice outside of your comfort zone. Now, what I mean by this is when you go out to the track on a practice day, obviously there is nothing on the line. Your goal is just to learn the track, change your car maybe, and to just, of course, get faster and faster on that layout on that track. But if you never practice outside of your comfort zone, A, you may never actually pick up the speed because you're not finding the areas where you actually can get a little bit faster on track. But the other thing is that when you go to race, traditionally, you'll kind of back it down a little bit. Maybe you won't drive it 100%, you'll drive it 90 or 95. That way, of course, you can stay consistent through the entire run. So it makes that transition a little bit easier. If you're used to practicing outside of your comfort zone, it makes driving the car in the race a lot easier because it's a significantly amount more comfortable when you go out there. And comfortability definitely means the difference of potentially winning or losing. Because if you're uncomfortable, the car is going to just naturally, while you're driving it around, feel like it's a little bit more on top of the track. You might not feel totally in control, and that can definitely develop some inconsistency through the run where it almost feels like the car is driving you, if that makes sense, because you're not truly in 100% control. So tip number 3, practice outside of your comfort zone. Make sure that you are pushing a little bit of the next limit. That way, when you get into a racing situation, you can back it down that 5% and still be just as fast and make sure that you have a good, clean run. Tip number 4 is going to be learning to carry a little bit more corner speed. Now, this will go a little bit hand in hand with that last tip of just practicing out of your comfort zone, because of course, sometimes if you have too much steering or too much rotation, the car can feel a little bit unsettled. But it's always important to see if you can find that little bit of extra maximum limit out of the car or even yourself around the track. Now, when I say this data up front, it's going to sound very, very minuscule, which is going to be, let's say you sacrifice half a tenth per turn, 0.05, an exceptionally small number. But when you factor that over the course of a 10-turn track, that half a tenth now becomes half a second over the course of the full lap. And that's per lap. A 20-turn track, now you've lost a full second per lap. So that half a tenth can grow very, very dramatically over the course of that full track run. So it's going to be very important to make sure that you're maximizing your speed around those turns. That way, of course, at the end of the race, you're not significantly further behind the guy ahead of you. So like I said at the start, it's a very, very teeny amount, but as you build up over and over a course and a series of turns, it can definitely be a very, very dramatic difference. So tip number 4 is going to be, don't be afraid to try and find a little bit more corner speed, find that limit of the car. That way, again, you have the best opportunity to win your next race. Tip number 5 here is going to be something that is going to be a little bit more on the advanced side, and it's something that is very electric specific, and that is going to be to adjust your ESC settings. Now, the reason I preface this with it's specifically a more advanced thing is because, as I said earlier, as you're going out to the track for the first couple times, you're not going to have a whole lot of skill built up. I'm not going to have a whole lot of consistency. So that is what your main focus is going to be. Whereas with this, as you get faster and faster and you're looking for those extra couple tenths around the track, this can play a factor into your comfortability and your consistency. So the reason why this is very important is that, if your ESC is too aggressive on the throttle, too punchy, then it's going to be very hard to time jumps. That way you land directly on the downside. And then of course, let's say you have too much brake programmed into the speed control. Well, maybe the car's slowing down too much, so you're not able to do tip number 4, which is carry as much corner speed as possible. So it's going to be very important as you get to the higher and higher levels of racing to play around with a little bit. Now, it's not going to be something that you're going to have dramatically different from one track or the other. A lot of times, once you find your happy ESC settings, you're really not going to change them a whole lot. Maybe if the track has a really long straightaway or something, you might mess with your turbo or your boost, get a little bit extra of that speed out of it. But in the grand scheme of things, once you find your happy speed control settings, you're probably not going to change them a whole lot. It's going to be very, very minor as you go from track to track. So on that more advanced end, tip number 5 is going to be to play with your ESC settings. That way you can feel comfortable and maximize your lap time around the track. So now we've gone over our 5th and final tip. That will, of course, bring us to the conclusion of today's video. If you have any questions about the tips I went over today or the 6 tips that I ended up going over last time, definitely leave those down below. And also, out of the 11 tips that I've shared over these 2 videos, if you have something else that you may recommend to other drivers, whether it be a newer driver or an advanced driver, definitely leave those down below. And maybe in the future, I'll make another video for 5 more tips of how to get faster at the track. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and we'll see you in the next one.